Welcome into another week on the D3 Datacast, where we are bridging the gap between the NCAA tournament opening weekend and a standalone Sweet 16 weekend in men's basketball. I'm Zach Snyder, joined as always by Matt Snyder. If you are enjoying this ride, be sure to tell a D3 Hoops friend about it and send them a link for this show. Hit the subscribe button and enjoy this ride with us. It's just getting started, Matt. It's always fun to get through that opening weekend, look ahead at some of the matchups we're getting, look ahead to some of the matchups we could be getting. I'd ask just for your reaction on opening weekend, but we're going to spend some time talking about that unless you've got some sort of high level, top reaction you want to give to the overall thing.
It's just so fun to go through the first and second rounds of the tournament, but it's also devastating to get from 64 teams down to 16. You've got to say goodbye to so many programs at once. That's the bad part, but the games are fun and they're going to continue to be fun. We've got a lot of great action ahead, and you kind of get to focus in now on the 16 teams that are left.
So let's go back to the round of 64 and talk about some of the things that happened in that first and then also the second round, kind of pod by pod. Let's go with the Trinity Connecticut quadrant. The top seeded Trinity Bantams hosted Cuca. They got a 74-63 win in round one. Just an 11-point win in what I think the computer thought was going to be like a 35-point game. Big time departure from expectation, despite Trinity indeed avoiding the upset. The neutral court matchup there in Hartford was Babson with a 71-67 win over St. Joseph's Maine in a game that we expected to be close, and it was indeed a very good first round matchup. But it was Trinity ultimately coming out of the weekend with a 71-61 win over Babson. Matt, thoughts on this pod as it played out?
I mean, I'm sure Cuca is disappointed to exit after the first round, but what a run that they had to get through the Empire 8 tournament as the 7 seed and then take Trinity, to the brink with, I think this was like a tie game with 10 minutes left or something close to that, right? So, and Cuca was leading at halftime. In the second half, they had leads. That's an incredible effort, incredible game. I don't know that Trinity was ready for that, and they gave them everything that they wanted. So that was really, really impressive. And then just, a really entertaining game between Babson and St. Joseph's Maine. Not one that I was able to watch a ton of, but just checking from the scores and then tuning in from time to time as other games were in timeouts or when I was in a point in my night when I was kind of channel surfing through the games. Just to see that one kind of be a possession or two kind of down the stretch was really fun.
And that 10-point win by Trinity over Babson doesn't really tell the story there. That was a 10-point lead by Babson about midway through the half, the second half there. So Matt, the story for me here really was that Trinity faced much bigger test level than I think was thought of, considering how highly regarded Trinity has been this whole season. Not that I think there's cause for concern, and in any tournament run, I think you expect even a champion is going to have at least one game you look back on and maybe breathe a sigh of relief or looks a little bit suspicious maybe. But I guess ultimately all that matters is that they did survive the weekend, right? Survive and advance. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and they're still a great team, but they entered the tournament as our computer's number one team. They exited the first weekend as the number two team, so they did come back to the field a little bit, and we'll talk more about that later.
All right, let's move on to get to the point where you can talk about Trinity's opponent coming up here next weekend. Let's start with Redlands getting a 97-75 win over Susquehanna, a game they really jumped on top of Susquehanna from the get-go, and cruised to a first-round victory in that one. Host Hood got an 84-71 win over Vassar, setting up, one of the faster-paced matchups of the tournament between Redlands and Hood. Hood gets the 114-104 win at home there. And Matt, Javon Yarbrough was great, 42 points there for Hood in the win. I thought they did a really great job of not only handling the pressure that Redlands brings, but not trying to just only survive the pressure to get into the front court, but they were routinely, beating the pressure, looking to get straight to the rim as a result. And I think that was a really great game plan by them and one that really paid a lot of dividends.
Yeah, and one thing we've been looking for Hood, right, was we know their offense is great, and it was great this weekend, but could defensively, could they handle other tournament quality teams? And they were able to withstand Vassar. Right? Vassar's a great defensive team that their offense was able to win out. And then Redlands has been really great on both sides of the ball. And Hood was able to outscore them, but also, be able to compete defensively to kind of stop Redlands enough when they needed to. But really, that Hood offense, that Hood can score the ball, they can play with pace. I think they're really terrific there. And then just the really difficult thing about playing against Redlands was what Susquehanna found when they kind of got down 20 really early in that game. And then it was kind of even from there on out. By the time that they figured out how to play against Redlands, it was just they couldn't really catch up after that point. But Hood was able to solve that, right? They were able to kind of go toe to toe with them. Looked really strong, and I think that that's going to set up a really interesting game against Trinity, a team that's been there, done that, a team that can play on both sides of the ball. But will they be able to stop Hood? I think that's going to be an interesting question for every team going forward.
And more to say on that game as we jump into our Sweet 16 previews. But for now, let's move on to the bottom half of this Trinity Connecticut quadrant. Catholic, just a 2-point win, 71-69 over WestCon. And then Tufts, a 5-point win, 65-60 over Penn State Harrisburg. Tufts gets a 74-60 win over Catholic to advance to the Sweet 16. Kind of interesting, the first round games, very close. And then we get a 14-point game in that pod final.
Yeah, and that was as I was watching scores, that Tufts Penn State Harrisburg game that got really tight at the end, tighter than I thought it was going to. But Tufts was able to survive there. And then the game with Catholic was close for a while, but then kind of down the stretch in the second half, Tufts just really took advantage of that game, stretched the lead, and I think looked impressive doing it.
NYU played Gettysburg at Wesleyan, a 65-53 win for the Violets, continuing a really good season for them. A lot of change with, both on the court and on the bench, but, a really fine season for NYU that sees them not only get into the tournament, but advance to the second round. Host Wesleyan got a 76-66 win over a Lehman team that showed a lot of fight as a CUNYAC champion coming in, given, host Wesleyan all that they wanted in a first round matchup there. And then ultimately it was Wesleyan coming out of the weekend with an 84-69 win, ending the NYU season.
Yeah, impressive run for NYU. That Gettysburg game that they had in the first round, that was one of our computer's projected closest games, and yet they were able to win it by double digits. Keep a good arms reach by the end of the game, so that way that was never really a threat to go a different direction at the end. But yeah, Lehman was really impressive against Wesleyan. I think a 2-point game with 2 minutes left. It looks like a 10-point margin. You maybe just would scroll past that score saying, oh, Wesleyan won by double digits, but that was a competitive game. Wesleyan trailed kind of late-ish in that second half. And that was, a struggle for them. They really, now the last 2 minutes, they did execute, make their free throws, get some turnovers. But that was usually the CUNYAC champ against a NESCAC. That's not really a close matchup, but, really, really impressive what Lehman was able to do there. But then for Wesleyan to turn around against a good NYU team and kind of put the pedal to the metal in the second half on that one. So that's impressive stuff for Wesleyan. Then sets up that NESCAC matchup with them and Tufts.
All right, let's jump down to the bottom quadrant of the bracket. Brackets on the left side there. The Mary Washington quadrant. Mary Washington gets an 86-55 win over Worcester State, absolutely dominating. Earlier in the day in the neutral court matchup there at Mary Washington, Amherst, 63-46 win over WPI. I think we talked about it in one of last week's show, how just, Amherst being a team that has a lot of name recognition, gets into the tournament, gets a tournament win here, but it just seems like hasn't been able to maybe get the credit that they deserve, right? Kind of facing doubts all season. I think not only getting past WPI in the first round, but by a convincing score like that, maybe it's time to just say, you know what, Amherst actually was really good this season.
They were good. And on a night, I hope this is fair to say, on a night when every other NESCAC team underperformed in the tournament, even though Trinity won and Tufts, maybe I don't know if that was an underperformance, but Lehman playing close with Wesleyan, Amherst really took care of business and looked like the legit team out there against WPI. Then unfortunately for them, I think just Mary Washington is playing terrifically right now. They ran into a really good team, and Mary Washington winning both of their games comfortably, I think that just sets them up to be one of the favorites going forward.
Yep, an 81-64 win for Mary Washington there in their second round matchup with Amherst. All right, jumping down to the pod played at Wisconsin La Crosse. Claremont Mudd Scripps was an 84-60 winner over Aurora. and Wisconsin lacrosse gets a 75-61 win over Hope. Wisconsin lacrosse then a 79-62 winner over Claremont Mud Scripts. Pretty convincing weekend for lacrosse to come out of the weekend there with a 14-point win over a Hope team that was playing really well to claim the MIAA tournament championship, and then a 17-point win over a Claremont Mud Scripts team that's played well all season. Got a convincing win over Aurora in their first round game.
Yeah, I raised an eyebrow. I wasn't surprised that CMS won that game, but to win that game by 24, that was a surprise to me. It wasn't really, I don't think, that close all the way through. But yeah, really, really impressive weekend for UW Lacrosse. Kind of their second weekend in a row for them as well. What they did in the WIAC tournament and then here in the NCAA tournament at home. 2 games by double digits against pretty good teams, pretty good programs. UW Lacrosse, if they're playing their best ball now, if Mary Washington's playing their best ball now, that's going to be maybe one to circle there for the Sweet 16.
All right, bottom half of this bracket, games played at Gustavus Adolphus. Mary Hardin-Baylor flies up from Texas and gets an 84-76 win over Stevens Point. Gustavus gets a 16-point win over Bethany Lutheran, 86-70, and then Gustavus Adolphus with a 90-72 win over Mary Hardin-Baylor in the second round there. Even more so maybe than what we just talked about with lacrosse. Gustavus Adolphus really taking care of business with a 16-point win in the first round, an 18-point win over a good Mary Hardin-Baylor team there in the second round. Gustavus Adolphus has been getting a lot of credit in the top 25 poll. We talked about that, but I just feel like I don't know that nationally they're getting as much credit as they've deserved, and looking really good coming out of that first weekend with some convincing results.
And really impressive what they were able to do to Mary Hardin-Baylor in that second half to really put that game away, put them out of reach,
Yeah.
And get a really convincing win there. I think Gustavus, that game is good. They weren't really, I think they had one loss in the MIAC, right? Otherwise, they weren't super well tested. Beating Mary Hardin-Baylor, who had handled Wisconsin Stevens Point the night before. I think that's a really impressive win for Gustavus there on Saturday night.
All right, let's go to Chicago, where Otterbein got a 57-52 win over Wisconsin Platteville in a game that, Matt, I wasn't able to see it, but I was scoreboard watching, and this was one that, as there, the gap of time between when I last saw the score and then I saw the final score, that gave me an "oh wait, what?" kind of result, as I'd last seen Wisconsin Platteville up double digits in the second half. So I was a little bit surprised to see Otterbein the ultimate winner there, but credit the way that they were able to close that one. Host Chicago got a 72-48 win over Penn State Barron, and then Chicago ends Otterbein's season in the second round with an 81-66 win.
Yeah, Platteville had led Otterbein. I think it was 13 or 14. I forget exactly when. But I tuned in when that game got really close and Otterbein flipped that to take the lead. I watched the last at least 4 or 5 minutes of that, and Otterbein was really good down the stretch. Platteville did make a few shots to make it interesting. Otterbein missed a couple of free throws, but ultimately it was Otterbein able to execute down the stretch, and really impressive win for them. First tournament win for them in maybe 20 plus years, something around that mark. They said at the end of the broadcast. That was really, really good to see them get that tournament victory there. And we had mentioned Penn State Barron now in that other game at U Chicago, kind of being a sneaky good number 15 seed, but Chicago did not mess around. They did not really let Penn State Barron hang around in this game. So Chicago took care of business, and then in the second half took care of business against Otterbein as well to really show with the favorites that they were there on their home court and just win that pot outright.
All right, let's jump to the other side of the bracket where Emory is the top seed in that top right quadrant. Let's start with the neutral court game there between Roanoke and Rhodes. 88-84 win for Roanoke in a really, really good game. Some huge shots down the stretch for Roanoke to close out Rhodes. Rhodes led quite a bit of the game, and even as Roanoke was trying to really pull away, put it away, they kept fighting. That was a tremendous finish to watch. Emory with an 87-73 win over MUW, and then just another fantastic battle. Emory gets an 83-81 win over Roanoke in overtime. In a game that, 83-81 looks fairly high scoring, but it was in overtime, and down the stretch in regulation and in overtime, just it felt like, I don't know if it was tired legs on the back-to-back and the kind of just struggle the game was, but, it seemed like both teams were only able to score enough just to keep the other side from, having any chance to pull away or just make a few more shots, and one of those teams would have been able to pull away. Kind of the offenses, uh, kind of betrayed themselves a little bit, but ultimately Emory able to pull it out.
Yeah. Every now and then in tournaments like this, you get a game in the first weekend that felt like it was maybe like a second weekend type of a game. I think this one had that feel for sure, especially in overtime, two really good teams. I think the reality is Roanoke was a little bit underseeded here. We just kind of knew that this was going to be the case due to the geography. Maybe it would have been nice to be this a second weekend type of a game. But really good matchup. Emory did come away with a win, and now Emory sets themselves up maybe to be one of the favorites. I mean, they've been kind of like a top 4 team all year long, so maybe they were already a favorite to be in the Final Four. But getting through this test, I think now sets Emory's path up pretty well for them to be able to take advantage of that.
And we'll get back to Emory's path here, based on the other pod that they're linked up with. That was at Montclair State, where we got our tournament opener, a 1 p.m. Friday tip with Yeshiva taking on Bates. Yeshiva jumped out, looked good early. Bates, made a real game of it. A little bit of a controversial ending with a foul with 1 second left. Free throws gives Yeshiva the 71-69 win.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of people that said you can't make that call. So Yeshiva player got a rebound under their defensive basket, got bumped to the ground, and so the foul was called with like 0.2 seconds left, and Yeshiva was awarded. I think it was a double bonus at that point, and they made both shots. I think they were trying to miss the second one, but it went in, and they won that game. I think you have to make a call because a no call is still a call in that the player landed out of bounds. So it either has to be a travel or out of bounds, which would give the ball back to Bates on a play that they didn't rebound the basketball. So I think a no call is still a call. I think the foul is the right call. I think maybe the controversy was it just called a little bit late? Should there have been maybe even a full second on the clock, enough for maybe Bates to chuck it and catch and shoot? But that was a close game, and Bates did make a really great comeback after being kind of down double digits there. But Yeshiva was able to hold it off, and they got the victory there.
But the big result of the day, Maine Farmington takes down host Montclair State 96-84 in a game that really they were able to get kind of that double-digit lead and hold Montclair State at arm's length there. Very impressive. In one of this turned out to be the only host that we saw go down in opening weekend, and it wasn't even in the second round as Maine Farmington gets a first round win over Montclair State. They move on into that second round game against Yeshiva, who took care of business as the beneficiary of the team that was able to knock out the host. 92-69 win to send the Max on to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, really impressive stuff from Maine Farmington. I don't think we talk about the NAC champion all that often getting wins in the NCAA tournament. I haven't actually looked back to see the full record there, but really impressive to go on the opponent's home court and get the win. Then Yeshiva was able to turn around and get that victory. But yeah, you're right, Zach. The only host that didn't advance to the Sweet 16 actually ended up going down the first night. So a lot of credit there to Maine Farmington and what they were able to do against Montclair State.
All right, down to the bottom half of this quadrant. John Carroll blows out Grinnell 118-86. We talked about how much potential this had to be a really fun matchup, but the way that John Carroll was able to jump out to a lead and not only maintain but extend it was very impressive to send the Blue Streaks on to the second round. A lower scoring game, not surprisingly, perhaps with John Carroll and Grinnell matching up, but Illinois Wesleyan gets a 62-51 win over a Heidelberg team that really just struggled to score the basketball all night. And then the next night, Illinois Wesleyan gets a 63-60 win in a game that, what was it, a 38-38 tie at the half. And then really they put the clamps down on John Carroll in that second half, getting out to a double-digit lead to send the Titans onto the Sweet 16.
Yeah, Zach, really interesting that this John Carroll Grinnell game, for our computer score predictions, predicted this to be the highest scoring game of the first round. I think at a total of, I'm just trying to remember offhand, I think it was 206 total points. And I think here 204 total points were scored. So pretty close on that total number for what was predicted to be the highest scoring game of the first round there. But yeah, Illinois Wesleyan just took care of business. I think that's what teams like to do on their home court. They did it, winning both games by double digits. Not always, you're not always completely comfortable even in those games, but being able to pull away in the second half, especially from John Carroll there, I think was impressive. And now we find out that they're going to be able to host the Sweet 16 game against Endicott. So that'll be an interesting dynamic there next weekend.
They do. matchup with Endicott because Endicott hosts a pod that they come out of. But first, Franklin and Marshall fell 75-66 to Cortland in the neutral court game at that site. Endicott was a 96-82 winner over Newman, setting up what was a terrific second round game between Endicott and Cortland. Cortland falls by one. It's a 58-57 win for Endicott. Cortland had that final possession, had a shot, got swatted away, and then with I think 3/10 of a second or 4/10 of a second left on the clock, weren't able to get kind of a catch and shoot. Really much of an attempt out of that, but a tremendous finish there to send the Gulls onto the Sweet 16. And you already made reference to it by their seed, by their final NPI ranking, this game would have been played at Endicott, but Illinois Wesleyan will be hosting it uh, due to some sort of situation there with Endicott's bid. We do know that they put into host because they hosted the first weekend, right? And those kinds of things go in at the same time. But for one reason or another, apparently on that application, they indicated that they would not be able to host the second weekend. So with the committee not able to select them, it goes to Illinois Wesleyan.
Yeah, credit for Endicott for winning that pod. We mentioned Montclair State was the only one that didn't get through. I think Endicott was the one that our computer was a slight underdog to get through their pod, but they battled down the stretch against Cortland. That game was kind of back and forth. They had a big defensive stand, as you called out, to win that game. So really good stuff from Endicott there, showing not that they were Endicott doubters. They've been in the top 25 and kind of moving up all season long. But for people that were skeptical of the path that they took through the CNE, especially to get there. They have the big win against Tufts. That was in November at this point. But to come through this pod, getting that win over Cortland, I think is good. Sets up a really interesting matchup, as I mentioned, at Illinois Wesleyan.
All right, let's talk about the St. Thomas quadrant now. St. Thomas hosted a first round game between Trinity, Texas, and Whitworth, flying in from the Pacific Northwest. Trinity gets the 71-63 win to move on to the second round. Host St. Thomas, a 69-63 overtime victory over Belhaven. Another surprisingly close game there for one of the hosts, but they do move on and then get a 75-58 win over Trinity, Texas after they brush off whatever it was that happened in that opening round game.
Well, and Belhaven very nearly won that game, I think, in regulation. Ended up going to overtime. St. Thomas did get the win. That would have been the upset of the night. That maybe already was the game of the night. But we talked about how Keuka and Lehman took their opponents to the brink. Belhaven, as an underseed here, took St. Thomas all the way. Really impressive that they were able to put up that kind of fight. But St. Thomas did take care of business in overtime and then just really put the hammer down against Trinity on the next night. I think maybe Trinity and St. Thomas, old conference rivals, maybe sick of matching up against each other. But here in the second round, there's only so much you can do in the NCAA tournament matching up. And it was St. Thomas that was able to just roll absolutely in this game.
Whitewater and Loras faced each other at Wash U. It was an 85-76 win for Whitewater. Host Wash U really rolled maybe to a surprisingly convincing win, 82-47 over Transylvania. And then Wash U with a 74-71 win in a really good game against Whitewater to move on to the Sweet 16, where they will fly down to Texas to meet St. Thomas.
And I think a lot of us had that Whitewater Wash U potential matchup circled there. We got to see it. It was a really good one. Wash U's playing good ball now. They've strung together several wins now. They're looking really strong. Interesting that we get to see a rematch now between a game that's already happened, Wash U and St. Thomas. That was a 1-point victory for Wash U. Get to see it again.
Mm-hmm. We talked about how well lacrosse is playing, but don't forget Wisconsin Whitewater was actually the regular season champion there in the WIAC. All right, one of the really great games of the early afternoon there on Friday was Washington and Jefferson getting an 82-77 win over Mount Union in a game played at Christopher Newport. Later on there that evening, Christopher Newport was a 75-62 winner over Stevens. And then Christopher Newport, really put it on kind of midway through. Well, not even midway through the first half. I think they closed on a nice run in the last few minutes of the first half and then really extended it out in the second half for a 90-61 win over the Presidents.
Yeah. I watched a lot of that Mount Union game with Washington and Jefferson. That was just another view of what we saw from Washington and Jefferson at the Great Lakes Invitational. They gave Mount Union a lot of pressure, a lot of defensive pressure, and a lot of trouble with that defensive pressure. Forced a lot of turnovers, and then Washington and Jefferson was hitting big shots, especially down the stretch. Reminded me
Yep.
of that game they played. I think it was against Maryville, where just
Yeah.
every time they needed a big shot, they came up with one. That's the case against Mount Union, and I think that was Washington and Jefferson's season. In those games that they were just able to hit, they were a really, really tough team to beat. They could hang with anyone in the country. Unfortunately, that wasn't every game for them. And then the next night, Christopher Newport was really to kind of put it to them, was able to handle what Washington and Jefferson brought a lot better. But really impressive stuff on the first night for W&J, but a really impressive weekend overall for Christopher Newport, looking really, really strong, coming up with a tough weekend, a tough matchup next weekend, but really good stuff first weekend there for the Captains.
The first round exit is disappointing for a Mount Union team that had a really nice season and, just a couple weeks ago looked to be in really good position to be a host in the opening weekend. But Matt, as we approached the first round, I felt like they were really one of the wild card teams in this tournament that it really wouldn't surprise me whatever happened with them in the first round. So, in filling out my bracket for the bracket challenge, I ended up going with Washington and Jefferson in what was an upset because of what you mentioned, seeing kind of the potential they have in that Maryville game. But I wouldn't have been surprised if Mount Union had come out of this pod, right? If
Yeah.
they could have been in the Sweet 16, and that wouldn't have surprised me either. So they're really one of my wild card teams in Mount Union. I don't think there would have been anything that happened with them this weekend that would have
Yeah.
surprised me.
Well, and the margins are thin. I think it was a 2 point loss to Otterbein in the OAC semifinals. If they had won that game, maybe if they had maybe won the whole OAC, then maybe they could have been a host. Maybe this pod is shaped differently. Maybe they do come through. Only a 5 point loss here, as it was to Washington Jefferson. Just when we have a lot of parity like we have in Division Three, these really close games can make a big deal. And unfortunately for Mount Union, kind of their last 2 games of the season were just close losses that could have gone either way.
All right, another close one that could have gone either way, Matt, in a game that was played at Randolph-Macon. TCNJ a 74-73 winner over Johns Hopkins, as Nick Koch makes a not quite a buzzer beater. I think there was 1.1
Yeah.
put back on the clock after the review, but he hits a 3-point shot as they were down 2 to put them up 1. That sent TCNJ onto the second round. Randolph-Macon got a 76-52 win over NC Wesleyan. And then it was Randolph-Macon, doing the business against TCNJ in the second round there, a 68-45 winner to move on to face Christopher Newport in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, a really entertaining game there between TCNJ and Johns Hopkins. Just really great execution and shot making for TCNJ down the stretch, coming up with rebounds, and then that big, not quite buzzer beater at the end was really impressive for them down the stretch. And Randolph Macon just kind of doing what we come to expect from Randolph Macon, taking care of business, double-digit wins, 20-point wins in both of these games. Gets harder from here on out, but that's kind of what Randolph Macon has done when they're the favorite, is they tend to execute and take care of business.
One other observation from me, Matt, we talk about Hopkins here losing. That's the third Centennial team
Yeah.
that we got to here as we round out kind of the opening weekend. Centennial Conference goes 0-3. They get 3 teams in, none of them pick up a first down win. Kind of a disappointing performance for a 3-bid league.
Yeah. Yeah. They're all kind of mid seeds. They had kind of those even-y matchups in the first round, but yeah, none of them were able to come away with that win, unfortunately.
All right, before we dive into our Sweet 16 preview, any other thoughts on the opening weekend?
I just for I think the first round, so the round of 64, we kind of came away with about as many favorites as we expected to, as our computer predicted. I was kind of more surprised the second night that it was more
Got those.
chalk than the first night, right? So second night seemed like it was very chalk. In a first round that wasn't upset heavy, but maybe some of the close games ended up just tilting the way toward the favorites at the end. But yeah, that was kind of interesting to me.
Well, even in terms of the first round, I think the favorites slightly outperformed. We mentioned on one of the shows last week that if you take all the win probabilities for those teams that were above 50% compared to all those teams that were below 50%, the computer would expect the favorites to pick up about 24 and a half, right? So I think we called it out as 24 wins, leaving 8 for those underdogs. In actuality, favorites won 27 and
Yeah.
lost just 5, right? So outperformed. But even more dramatic in that second round, is you look at the second round win probabilities. I pulled them from the site prior to play on Saturday. It was 11.4 wins for the favorites compared to 4.6 expected wins for the underdogs. And the favorites actually pulled out a 14-2 record, right? So I feel like in the first and second round a year ago, it was an overperformance by the underdogs. Here, things swing back the other way,
Yeah.
which is really interesting because that's really not been the theme of what this overall Division III basketball season has been. It's very much been a, hey, there's a bunch of teams where anyone can beat anyone. So interesting to see that this would be the year that the computer favorites perform even better than what the computer would say is expected in terms of, kind of the aggregated overall win probabilities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, let's dive into some of these Sweet 16 matchups. Let's go back to the Trinity, Connecticut quadrant, where the Bantams will host Hood. And Matt, this is a little bit interesting. We talked about Trinity, Connecticut not being maybe as impressive or having a harder time than would have been expected. And as a result, we see Trinity, Connecticut has lost that number one spot in the D3 Datacast efficiency ratings. They are now the number two team in the country, according to the computer. They host who the computer sees as the number 24 team in terms of that being Hood. So even though Trinity, Connecticut has fallen to the number two team, it's still a big gap between that group that contains Trinity at number two with number one now Randolph-Macon, which we'll get to, and the rest of the field. And as a result of that, even though this is a 2 versus 24 matchup in terms of how the computer rates these teams, it puts a 19-point computer line on this one and gives Trinity, Connecticut a win probability of 96%. Surprisingly big numbers, I think, when you just compare it to, hey, if I was swagging some sort of guess and based on what I think of these teams. So even with a little bit of a fall from what the computer thought of Trinity, Connecticut heading into last weekend, this is still a very big number, very big favorite with Trinity hosting Hood.
Yeah, but it does feel bigger than probably you or I would assign to it if we were just picking a random line. The
Exactly. Yeah.
computer's problem with Hood, right? If there's a quote unquote problem with it, is that they're offensive elite, but their defense has not always been that, right? So can they play against a team like Trinity, who's elite on both sides of the ball? We know that Hood can score on anyone, but will they be able to keep Trinity off the board enough to tilt the game into their favor? That's what the computer's not sure about. That's why it sees such a big line. I would favor Trinity in this game if I was making my own line. It wouldn't be 19, I don't think. It would be more like 9. 8 or 9 is kind of what my gut tells me, but that's not what the computer sees, and that's why we're going to have to see the game next weekend.
Always glad to see it play out on the court, right?
Yeah.
All right, the other Sweet 16 game in this quadrant sees a matchup between Tufts and Wesleyan. The computer sees Tufts as the number 4 team overall. Wesleyan is the number 7 team overall. Even though the computer prefers Tufts, this game will be played at Wesleyan, and that makes Wesleyan a slight favorite, just with how things shift with the home court advantage. This kind of matchup is very much within that margin. And so as a result, the computer line is 1 point in Wesleyan's favor. And in terms of win probabilities, it's a 53-47 split in Wesleyan's favor.
Yeah, really even matchup between two conference mates. Although this will be only the second meeting of the season. Even though they've played a full conference schedule and then a conference tournament, they only matched up once in the regular season, and that's it. But yeah, the home court's making all the difference right here. But the interesting dynamic of being the standalone Sweet 16 weekend is now we're guaranteed that a NESCAC will make the Fort Wayne Elite 8 experience there, because one of these teams is going to win. So we're going to get at least one NESCAC, maybe two if Trinity makes it as well. But really, really even matchup here. Will be fascinating to see who can win this one.
And if it's Trinity, Connecticut, and Wesleyan, that would be a repeat of a game we saw in Fort Wayne a year ago. That was a semifinal. But this one would be played in Fort Wayne as a quarterfinal. But two teams that need to get through these games first. All right, let's jump down to the Mary Washington quadrant, where Mary Washington will host La Crosse. Mary Washington heads into Sweet 16 weekend as the computer's number 3 team, getting it done both offensively and defensively as top 10 teams. La Crosse is the number 17 team, according to the computer, with much better rating on the offensive side of the ball, but still a top 100 team on the defensive side. Mary Washington is favored on the computer line by 9.5 and is seen as kind of an 80-20 split in terms of the win probabilities.
Yeah. And I think that line, though, at 9.5, I think that says more about what Mary Washington has done, especially lately, than anything really negative about UW Lacrosse. The computer's still pretty high on UW Lacrosse. It's just that Mary Washington has started to make gains on that lead group. I think there was several weeks, even into February, where Mary Washington was kind of maybe outside of that top 5 group, the group of teams that I was kind of calling even. Now, at least by now, the computer has pulled them solidly into that group as the number 3 team by adjusted efficiency margin. Not quite at the level where Trinity and Randolph-Macon are at more like plus 40. They're plus 31, so that's still really strong. But that's where you're seeing that huge 9.5 line that looks really big. But I think that just goes to show. I mean, Lacrosse is playing really well right now too, but Mary Washington has just been, I think, up a gear from where they were earlier in the season. And so this is going to be a fascinating one. I think really interesting to see how it goes because both these teams are kind of playing at their peak right now, I feel like.
And it'll be a top 10 matchup when Gustavus Adolphus travels to Chicago for a Sweet 16 game. The computer sees Gustavus as the number 10 team. Chicago's the number 5 team. Uh, Teams in the top 50 offensively and defensively across the board. Matt, it's a kind of a 2/3, 1/3 in terms of the split on the win probability in Chicago's favor. A computer line of 4.5. But being at Chicago is a big
Yeah.
deal. If this was at Gustavus, that's kind of in that range where you're probably talking about this one being a pick 'em.
Yeah. Well, and I think in this one, I think it could be a big deal how Chicago has played a UAA schedule already. Gustavus hasn't. They've gotten now to the Sweet 16, so now they've played good teams. They had good teams in the MIAC, but their schedule, I think it's safe to say, was not the same as University of Chicago's all season long. So Chicago has been in a bunch of these types of games. Gustavus has been in maybe only a few of these types of games. So I'll have to see if that makes a difference. But I feel like I'm repeating myself by saying like this is going to be a great one to watch. We're in the Sweet 16, especially in a year where I've kind of said all year long that there's maybe 35 teams that could make it to Fort Wayne, and I wouldn't be surprised. It's like all these teams basically that are left that we've been talking about. So these are the matchups we've wanted to see all season long. And so it's great that we're going to get them. And anyone's type of a game, big that this is at Chicago, that takes this from maybe like a 55-45 game to a 66-34 game. I would maybe definitely pick the Maroons in this one, but it will be fascinating for sure.
Halfway through, let's go to the Emory quadrant. Emory will host Yeshiva in Atlanta. In terms of those computer ratings, Yeshiva is kind of the one that's a bit more of a surprise, but they played very well in beating Bates and then Maine Farmington, who pulled off the upset against the host Montclair State. There, Emory's the number 6 team according to the computer. Yeshiva number 43. We've seen some big computer lines, Matt. It's just 11 for Emory, so this one may be more in range with what people would expect, even though it is, kind of maybe a surprise matchup at this point with Yeshiva getting through to the Sweet 16.
Well, yeah, I think Emory's been up at the top kind of elite group of the national rankings and computer ratings for most of the season. Yeshiva has been making gains. We know they started the season with a really tough schedule, a schedule that they didn't always win a ton. They were competitive in a few. They got blown out in a few. Then finally were able to maybe win 1 or 2 of those types of games, and then just had a fantastic Skyline tournament season. And now we know that that's not the greatest schedule out there in the world, but I think that they were able to put the hammer down in some of those games, gain confidence, beat Farmingdale, the one other good team in that conference, be able to beat them twice, and then to be able to get out of that Montclair State pod. Beating Bates is a really good game. I don't think they were expected to see Maine Farmington the next night, but they took care of business in those games. I think they've been really solid. I think this line to me looks about right. I think Emory is a big favorite, but Yeshiva is a team that can make big shots in big moments. And I wouldn't be surprised if you look up at the clock and there's under 3 minutes left and this game is within a possession or two with Yeshiva threatening to make another couple of big shots. That could definitely go this way.
I think you're right. All right, Illinois Wesleyan will get the chance to host Endicott, despite Endicott finishing higher in the NPI. Just some of the things that can happen depending on how the bids go in, who does or doesn't indicate that they're able to host on a given weekend. Illinois Wesleyan ranked 19 by the computer, Endicott 31 by the computers. That's Endicott's a team that maybe there's a little bit of computer disagreement with top 25 versus where they finished in NPI. Interesting breakdown if you compare these teams in terms of how the computer sees them offensively and defensively, where Illinois Wesleyan, ranks 127 in terms of that adjusted offensive number that goes into the overall adjusted efficiency margin. But top five defensively, it's kind of an opposite story for Endicott, where they're the number 13 offense, number 117 defense. But kind of similar paths to, opposite paths to a similar place, right? Because it's just a 4.5 point computer line, which here's another one where the home court advantage is factoring in a big way, and a kind of a 2/3, 1/3 split in terms of breaking it down in win probabilities.
Yep. Yeah, and an interesting dynamic for Illinois Wesleyan is that they've gotten Noah Cleveland back, I think kind of in a cast off the bench. So that adds a dynamic, especially on both sides of the court, but especially offensively, another dynamic of scoring to maybe help buoy that offensive number. But Endicott's a team that has just taken care of business and won games this season. You can talk about playing in the CNE, not always getting tested the toughest, but out of conference, they really took care of business most games. They're 28-1, right? They're not going to be a stranger to needing to win a game. They've won games on the road. They've won games at home. Fascinating matchup. Not one you see a whole lot of CCIW versus a CNE. So I'm at least glad in this tournament we're afforded in the Sweet 16 here some opportunities to get teams from the East Coast out to the Midwest, maybe vice versa, and get some of these interesting matchups going on.
All right, WashU will travel down to Houston to take on St. Thomas in a rematch from a game that we saw in non-conference play that was in St. Louis, and a one-possession game there. This is another one that the computer is also seeing as a one-possession game. 2-point computer line in St. Thomas's favor as the host, 57% win probability. Another one that I think is really interesting to see. It's going to be kind of interesting to see WashU have to go down to Houston to play an NCAA tournament game.
Yeah, getting away from the home court for WashU where this game was last time. But look, this is our computer's number 12 and number 10 teams in the country. It's about as even as they get. Really even numbers there when it comes to adjusted efficiency margin. The offensive rating for St. Thomas isn't great, but they have kind of the opposite elite number, defensive number. We'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, almost like a 50-50 coin flip type of game. Maybe one of the closest things we have to a coin flip here in the Sweet 16 round. So definitely one to circle if you can watch this one.
And Christopher Newport will play at Randolph-Macon, who enters the Sweet 16 as the new number one team in the D3 Datacast efficiency ratings, in part because we talked about Trinity, Connecticut maybe having a little more trouble in the opening weekend than when we expected or thought that they might. Randolph-Macon had no such troubles in their opening weekend, and we see that reflected in how the efficiency ratings adjust accordingly. And it's no surprise. Randolph-Macon, the number one computer offense, number two defensively, elite on both sides of the ball. That's a pretty good recipe for getting one of those elite ratings. And just how far the Randolph-Macon Trinity, Connecticut group is ahead of the field leads to another big computer line number here, 16.5 in this case, leading to a 93% win probability compared to just a 7% win probability for a Christopher Newport team that, probably never should feel or never should be that big of an underdog, right? This is a team that is no stranger to this point in the tournament, no stranger to tournament success. Kind of interesting dynamic added to a game that's already an interesting game between two teams that are used to playing at a high level, or used to matching up in non-conference play, right? This is a type of matchup that we look forward to like every year at the start of a new basketball season, because this is one of the premier non-conference matchups we get every year.
Well, and two programs that have hung national championship banners in the last 4 or 5 years, right? So they're no stranger to executing well. And I think that's, for Randolph-Macon in particular, to me, their calling card is they have really skilled players, but also they get the most out of those players and play together as a unit almost as well as anyone in the country on a yearly basis. And I think sometimes I watch their game and I'm impressed, but I'm just kind of intrigued that their computer rating ends up so high. But I think that's it to me, is that they just get everyone on the same page as good as anyone. And that takes a skilled player. And you combine that into a really, really skilled unit. And that's been Randolph-Macon. I mean, tough test here with Christopher Newport. Again, that's another line, like 16.5. That feels way too big. That feels too big by about at least 7 points. We have to see how that's going to actually go. But two teams that have been in Fort Wayne, that have won in Fort Wayne, playing for the right to get back to Fort Wayne is a really interesting dynamic on its own.
So that's how the D3 Datacast computer sees these Sweet 16 games. But let's zoom out a little bit, talk about some updated bracket odds. Having played our way to the Sweet 16, and the computer having a chance to update following the results of those games. Let's take a look at the bracket as it remains in terms of kind of who are the favorites to advance onto Fort Wayne, and kind of the adjusted computer odds for who the favorites are to win it all.
And just a reminder for those who didn't catch us last week, when I take this zoom out kind of matrix view, I just calculated them as neutral court odds. So the odds will slightly vary from what you've seen previously, but I just do that as kind of a quick check or a quick look here. So yeah, the teams kind of in yellow highlights are the favorites to win that round. Two teams I just kind of want to talk about first, though, that have some red. I just put it their text red because those odds for those rounds have actually dropped a little bit. So for Trinity, their odds increased then to win the Sweet 16 and win to the Elite Eight because they've now reached these rounds. Or this round at least, but their Final Four odds and their championship odds have slightly dropped from last week's episode. I think two things at play there, maybe for Trinity. One, they struggled a little bit more than we thought they maybe would have in their first round games. So their computer rating took a little bit of a hit. They're now the number 2 team, not the number 1 team in the efficiency ratings that we have on our site. So that maybe dropped their ratings a little bit. But they also have maybe a difficult path developing here. They're going to have to play Hood. They're going to have to play then, if they win that game, they're going to have to play then the Tufts Wesleyan winner. Then maybe they have Mary Washington on the horizon. So I think the path that is developed for Trinity is also one of the more difficult paths that could have developed based on what brand they could have come up and not had to play. Maybe a Tufts or Wesleyan. Maybe someone would have upset those two teams. But so I think those two factors kind of come together to maybe slightly decrease. It's kind of interesting that they win 2 rounds and then their odds go down a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, you would expect that having taken away any possibility that there's an upset or losing those games in the first 2 rounds, then you would expect to see those go up just as some of that uncertainty, filters out. But Matt, you look down that efficiency rank column, there's a lot more of those single digit numbers in that top half, which talks about or speaks to your point about the path that Trinity Connecticut may have to take, and for that matter, anyone else who is in that top half. And then just add that on top of that, if you do get a Trinity Connecticut Randolph-Macon final, the computer now expects that to be a slight favorite towards Randolph-Macon, with them having taken over the number 1 spot in those rankings.
Exactly. Yeah, they're the number 2 team right now by our computer. They could then play the number 4 team, and then the number 3 team, and then the number 5 team, and then the number 1 team, right? So that's a lot of top teams that they would have to go through potentially to get there. The other team who's seen their odds drop a little bit, surprisingly, is Gustavus Adolphus to get the Elite Eight and beyond. One reason, as we had talked about the Chicago game, Chicago was a little bit less likely than expected to even get here because they had some tough opening weekend matchups. Those are now gone. They're here. So now Gustavus, I think, subsequent odds goes down because they were hoping that one of those paths would develop where maybe Chicago got upset by a Penn State Barron or something like that. I think that's not in play anymore. I think that's the big reason for Gustavus's drop is now that Chicago matchup in particular, to say nothing about a potential Mary Washington matchup down the road. Like all those paths have now developed for Gustavus Adolphus, where they too are going to have to go through a gauntlet if they're going to keep winning and advancing in this tournament.
Then we did our initial bracket odds episode. We talked about how Trinity Connecticut and Randolph-Macon had those big numbers just because they were sucking up so much of the computer odds, being so far ahead of the in the rankings, with 1 and 2 being as far away from number 3 entering the tournament as what it was, like 3 down to 25 or something like that. So it's no surprise necessarily to see that continues to be the case. Even though we talked about the dynamic with Randolph-Macon maybe now becoming the computer favorite to win it all at 38.7% compared to 36.6% from Trinity Connecticut. But then that also speaks to why we're not seeing even another double-digit number. Mary Washington is the next highest at 7, but they would have to go through Trinity Connecticut to even get to the championship game, right? Kind of similar deal with Emory at 4.7 as the next highest on that bottom half. They would have to go through a Randolph-Macon to even get to that game. And just with that gap between 1 and 2 and the rest of the field in the efficiency ratings, the computer's not giving great odds for any of those teams that are not in that 1 or 2 spot to get there, and of course, you have to be there to win it.
Yeah, right. And another interesting thing to me on this is once we get to Fort Wayne, or at least predicting who's going to get there, Trinity, Emory, and Randolph-Macon are all above 50% odds then to make the Final Four, get through one more round. But then there's that Mary Washington quadrant where all four teams are below 50% and everyone's at least 10%. So that's seen as maybe the most even pod right now as far as four teams that all have pretty reasonable-ish odds to get there, and no one being kind of a plurality there, if I'm using the term plurality correctly. But yeah, I guess maybe Mary Washington has the plurality, but not the majority. Maybe I'm using it incorrectly.
Well, it just sets up is there a favorite versus the field, right? So
Yeah.
in Mary Washington's case, the field would be a favorite over Mary Washington, kind of a
Yeah.
55-45. Whereas in the other cases, you would take Emory over the field. You would take Randolph-Macon over, the other 3-team field there. So I think that's ultimately whether or not plurality is the correct word, the way to think about it. All right, those are the odds. Let's see what actually plays out, not any sort of simulation or what's most likely to happen. Let's see what actually happens. All right, it's time to bring on a special guest as we move into the pick segment. Matt, you ready to welcome in our special
Yeah,
guest?
let's bring him on. I think he's waiting.
Joining us now, another special guest picker for this week. You may know him from places such as the DePaul men's basketball team or the QCast Season 6, Episode 8. Brady Kunko, welcome to the program.
Thank you guys for having me. It's a dream come true. Be on the Datacast after all this time watching.
I'm sure you can dream a lot bigger than that, and you've done a lot bigger things than be on our show. But it's cool to have you. We haven't had an opportunity to have a lot of players on this show, so it's a great honor for us to have you here. One thing I do want to ask you before we jump into the picks, because you're here to really get in, sink your teeth in on the picks. But there's a lot of talk online about how computers don't play the games; they're played on the court, obviously, and we know that too. But I want to get your perspective as a player, because you've probably checked D3 Datacast and had games where you're the favorite or you're the underdog. How do you, as a player, approach that kind of noise being out there when you know you still have to go out on the court and execute in the game?
Yeah, definitely have experienced both sides. I think it's important to kind of it's fun to see what the computer thinks in terms of efficiency. What we're going to do offensively, what other teams can do offensively, and kind of see where they think the scoring output's going to be based on offense, defense, whatever it may be. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're pretty confident in any game we're going into. So it's regardless of what the computer says, we're just going to go in and try and execute our game plan and figure out it from there. So.
And you're obviously interested in this kind of stuff. Are there other guys that are too, or are there guys that are just like, I don't want to hear about that. I just want to, do what we're doing. What's kind of the tenor there of the locker room conversation?
Yeah, it's definitely, I've definitely brought it into the locker room more than other people. Just kind of talking about it, obviously keeping in touch with the show and everything. But no, it's cool. It was cool to see a lot of guys kind of more invested in it this year and following MPI and efficiency rating stuff like that. Some guys checking out the site, weekly and seeing where we're at, seeing where other teams in our conference are at, and but yeah, I think everybody kind of sees it and then kind of forgets about it come game time and just go play the game. So, but it was cool to see everybody getting into it a little bit and figuring out the numbers and where we're going to be seated and all this stuff. So it was cool.
I wanted to ask you about the conference really quickly. Of course, as a member of the DePaul basketball team playing in the NCAA, it was really one of the most exciting conference races this season. One that fans most of the time couldn't really make heads or tails of. Even in the computer ratings, you had a group of 4 or 5 teams that were really tightly grouped together. I feel like we always hear from coaches, players, how tough conference play can be, and anyone can beat anyone. But that seemed to be especially the case in the NCAC this season, just with how tightly grouped you all were. What was it like to go through that conference season, just knowing that so much hinged on each win and loss because of that really even group that was there at the top?
It was definitely it's always a grind, but this year was more of a grind. Even obviously, there's 5 teams at the top who are all kind of within 1 or 2 games, pretty much the whole second half of the conference season, and then everybody else in the conference as well has beaten most of those teams, once or twice. So it was really important for us. I mean, we were 5-5. We lost to Wabash 5-5 in the league, and then we ended up rattling off kind of six in a row and finishing second in the league. So that was kind of a turning point for us and saying, every game is important, no matter who we play. If they're in first, they're in last. We can beat anybody, but we can lose to anybody, and we kind of figured that out in the middle of January. We're dropping some road games and some home games, and then we kind of figure it out and going a little streak to end it. But it's just awesome to see everybody twice in our league. I think it's you play them the first time and you kind of get an idea, but having the home and away is awesome. I know a lot of teams Division 3 and around kind of do that nowadays, but my high school we only played every team once, so it was kind of different coming into college for that. But yeah, it's awesome. You get to build some relationships with the guys in the league and coaches and stuff like that, and just makes for some great games down the stretch where everybody kind of knows what the deal is, but you still got to go out there and execute.
All right, well, you've obviously been a prolific D3 hooper on the court. We're going to test your skills here, picking games with us, being our guest picker. A lot lower pressure than what you've actually done, in front of people and in ball games there at DePaul. But here we go. So just recapping what Zach, you and I did last week at the beginning of the tournament here. We had Yeshiva versus Bates. That was a 4-point line. We both picked Yeshiva and they won that game, so we both got the credit there. Grinnell and John Carroll, that was a 3.5-point line in favor of John Carroll. Again, we both went with John Carroll and got that one. Zach, we finally split the bill here between Cortland and Franklin and Marshall. This was a 2.5-point line. You went the correct direction and you got Cortland to cover that one, so you got the point there. A really good game, Johns Hopkins and TCNJ. We both went with TCNJ. They won that game outright, and we both got the points. And then another split decision here, Mary Hardin Baylor and UW Stevens Point. You went with Mary Hardin Baylor plus the 1, and they won that game. I think the score is flipped here, but they won that game, and you got the point. So you've been really catching up on me, Zach. You were 5-0, 46-42-2. I'm 50-38-2. So if I somehow give this one up with how far I was, that will be just a complete disaster for me.
A chance to go 8-0 and pick up even more games this week. We're picking all 8 Sweet 16 games. Let's go.
All right. And Zach, I always forget how we do this. Are we going to have the guest pick first, or are we going to pick our lines and then let the guest kind of decide which was the correct decision there?
Yeah, let's have the guest go second. That way, if there's any ties, the tie between us gets broken.
Okay, so after both of us, then we'll have Brady go.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. We are doing all 8 games. We're gonna have all 16 teams picked. So we're gonna have a 4-team slide, then a 4-team slide. Only 8 games. We might as well pick them all here. So this is what we're gonna do. The first game on the docket is Yeshiva at Emory. This is an 11-point line. Zach, how do you see that one?
I'm going to take the points here with Yeshiva. There's a chance Emory just runs away with this, but with the way that Zevi Samet can shoot it, and they've already shown in this tournament that he's not all their offense, right? They have other options here. Emory can score with the best of them, but Yeshiva is a really good offensive team too. I think maybe there'll be a lot of points, but Yeshiva can keep up. I don't know if they will, but I think they can, and if they can, those 11 points are probably enough for me to take. Let's go max plus 11.
All right, Zach. Well, I'm not going to be scared about a big line here. I'm going to go with Emory plus the 11 or minus the 11 points. I think that they could run away with this one. I think the backcourt, I think there depends on the health of Max Zackheim. He commented in an interview I saw after the game that he may be dealing with a little bit of turf toe. That's why he was kind of in and out of the game there on that was the Bates game, I think he was. So we'll see. We'll see if he stays healthy, but he's going to have a lot of work to do to keep up with those Emory guards there. So I'm going to go with Emory. That's a big line. We're split, but Brady, you get to break the tie here.
Yeah, I'm gonna side with you. I'm gonna go Emory with minus 11. I have Emory winning my bracket this year, so I'm gonna stick and ride with them. I think their backcourt is unbelievable. Got to watch a couple of their games this year, and got to watch the Yeshiva Bates game on Friday. It was an awesome game. Obviously, a little contentious finish at the end, but get to see Zevi play. Unbelievable shot making, but I think Emory's backcourt is gonna take care of them.
Tough for sure. All right, Zach, our second game, Christopher Newport and Randolph-Macon. This is an even bigger line. This is 16.5 points in favor of Randolph-Macon. What do you think there?
I don't know how many times I've said it that keep falling into a trap with Randolph-Macon that there's a number out there that just it surely can't be right. 16.5 seems like a lot. So once again, maybe I'm setting myself up to look like a fool picking against Randolph-Macon just, compared to the computer line. I have no problem with Randolph-Macon being a favorite, even a heavy favorite here, but 16.5 against this Christopher Newport team just seems like way too much. Give me the Captains.
Yeah, Zach, I'm going to keep it simple too. I think that's just way too big of a line for me right now. I think Christopher Newport's too good. I mean, Randolph Macon's great, but 16.5, I'll take the points and see if I can get close. Brady.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with both of you. I just think, Christopher Newport, the tradition they've had over the last couple of years, I don't think they're gonna let one get away from him. You know, lose by 20 or something like that to Randolph Macon. Obviously, great team, but I'll take the points as well. I think Christopher Newport keeps it close and should be a great game.
All right, three-way agreement on that one. Next is going to be Endicott. They're playing at Illinois Wesleyan this weekend. That's a 4.5-point line in favor of the Titans of Illinois Wesleyan. Zach, your pick.
I'm gonna go with the home Titans here, even laying the 4.5. That suggests even if this was a road game for the Titans, they would have been favored on the road, had, Endicott been able to host this one. But it's at the Shirk. Illinois Wesleyan, I feel like is still weighed down by some early season stuff in the computer that I think just doesn't apply anymore. This is kind of a different team than what we saw earlier in the season. Especially knowing that Noah Cleveland is back and looking really good, even with that cast on. So I feel really comfortable laying the 4.5 with the Titans playing at the Shirk.
Yeah, Zach, I think this is going to be a great game. We're at the Sweet 16. Everyone's good. Although I don't know that Endicott has played a team at this level since like that first or second weekend of the season when they played Tufts. I think after that, their conference didn't offer an Illinois Wesleyan type of opponent. I think for that reason, I think that the Titans are ready for this game, and I'm sure Endicott is too. But even at 4.5 points, I'm going to go in favor of Illinois Wesleyan here. I think that they can win this game by a couple of possessions at least. I think it'll be a good one, but I think Illinois Wesleyan can win this one. Brady, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna keep following here. I think I was able to go to the game last night when Illinois Wesleyan played John Carroll, and just to see the environment, Shirk Center, just one of the best D3 atmospheres there is. Not just the D3, all college basketball. They get a lot of support from the community, a lot of students. So I think that them being able to host a game that they maybe weren't going to host originally, but are able to now, I think it'll be big. And seeing Noah Cleveland in person and just kind of how impactful he is, I think he's going to make a big impact. With another week to kind of heal, and we'll see what his hand looks like and then. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Titans as well.
All right. So all three of us going with Illinois Wesleyan in that one as well. Our fourth game to finish off this first page here, Washington U, 2-point underdogs now down on the road at St. Thomas in Houston. Zach, your pick.
Yeah, Wash U through after a close game against Whitewater. But Wash U's a team that was playing really well down the stretch as I was filling out my bracket. This is a matchup I had at this spot in the tournament, and I went with Wash U. I'm gonna stick with that.
Okay.
And not even taking the two. Just give me Wash U outright. I'm sticking with my bracket. I like the Bears.
Zach, really interesting game and interesting line because this was a matchup we've seen already this year. It was I think a 1-point Wash U win at Wash U. Now it flips to St. Thomas, and this almost just flips the home court advantage the other way, where it's a 2-point line. So it seems very much in line with what we've seen. I'm going to go with you though with Wash U. I think down the stretch with what Wash U has done in the UAA and now into the tournament, I think that they have found another gear. I think that they've gelled together as a team compared to where they were. I don't know if that was a November or a December game. I forget now, but I think their second half of the season was quite strong. So again, this is going to be a great game, a close game, maybe one of the games of the next round as far as competitiveness goes. But I'm going to take Wash U. Maybe not outright, but at least to keep it within one. Two's going to give me the push, so I'm going to go with the Bears there. Brady, up to you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go opposite of you guys here. I think I'm going to go with St. Thomas Tex. I think having the kind of a long travel from St. Louis to Texas would be a trip for Wash U, but have a lot of people from my area play for Wash U, Ryan Cohen and Connor May and other guys like that. Obviously, they do a great job in what they've done in the UAA over the season, but I think St. Thomas Tex is going to keep it up what they're doing. They're having a fantastic year as well. I think they're undefeated in their conference and um, just playing with a lot of momentum, probably a lot of confidence as well. So I'll go St. Thomas.
They're probably gonna be very much coming into that game feeling like they have something to prove too. Even though they're the higher seeded team hosting and everything like that, it's kind of an opportunity to make a tournament statement there for them.
All right, we are going on to the second page of our picks here. The next game that we are going to pick is Hood 19-point favorites. 19-point underdogs at Trinity, Connecticut. So another really big line here. Zachary.
Yeah, this is very similar with the Randolph-Macon game. I'm gonna just take the 19 and a half points here. We're seeing some really big numbers just because of how far ahead of the field the computer sees Trinity, Connecticut, and Randolph-Macon. But Matt, as I watched the games this past week, I don't know that we really saw that on the court with Trinity, Connecticut in their game against Cuca, and then they were down 10 kind of midway through that game against Babson. So with what we've seen, I don't know that right now. I would agree that Trinity, Connecticut is that far ahead of the field. So give me Hood, especially after coming off a really impressive win against Redlands.
Yeah, Zach, for me, going to be the same pick for most of the same reasons. Trinity struggled in that Cuca game and then won, but not. They won solidly against Babson, so that was the good win as well. But Hood looked great as well. I think that was a test that we were looking to see out of Hood, a really tough Redlands team. I think they went toe to toe with them. They bested them. So I think 19 just feels way too big for me right now. Hood's playing great. I don't wouldn't say that Trinity couldn't win this one or even win this big, but 19, like, come on, right now, that's not realistic for me. What do you think, Brady?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I just think the line's way too big. Hood offensively is just a lot of firepower. They're going to keep it. They're going to score. They're going to keep it in the keep it within that number. I think Trinity does win at the end, but I think Hood keeps it within the 19. So
All right, so again, agreement on Hood. Next, we go to the NESCAC special. Tufts 1-point underdogs at Wesleyan. Zach.
Well, we finally get to see Tufts and Wesleyan meet for a second time. All it took was a run to the Sweet 16 for it to happen between these two. But once again, this is basically a pick 'em game with a 1-point computer line. So I'm going to stay true to my bracket, which had Wesleyan advancing. So give me the Cardinals.
All right. Yes, important to note that they have not already played more times than WashU and St. Thomas has played, for instance. So I'm going to go with Tufts, though. I think Wesleyan is a team. They've been great. They've been great all year. They haven't always won convincingly necessarily. I think this is going to be a good one we're going to see, like you said, for the second time. I think Tufts can maybe win on the road. So I'm going to go with the Jumbos plus the 1. Brady, up to you.
I'm going to go with Wesleyan, kind of the same reason. I had them in my bracket. I think it's going to set up a great matchup with Trinity. It'd be a great game in the Elite Eight, and coming off their amazing season last year, I think they're hungry to kind of get back to where they were. So I'll go with Wesleyan.
All right, and then we have UW Lacrosse 9.5-point underdogs at Mary Washington. Zach, your pick.
Give me the 9.5 here. I'll take Lacrosse in the Eagles versus Eagles matchup. I really like Mary Washington. They were my champion in my bracket. I felt like I wanted to go against a couple of the favorites, and Mary Washington is a team I've really liked all year. I think they're capable of doing it. But Lacrosse is a team that I think can really hang with them, even if it's just kind of a grind. Like they're a team that can hang in there. I expect it to be a single digit game. So with the computer line at 9.5, give me Lacrosse.
Okay. Zach, I'm going to go with Mary Washington on this one. To me, Lacrosse is obviously great. This could likely be a close game. But if anyone is playing really, really well right now, I feel like it's Mary Washington. They've had a couple of weekends now with the C2C kind of tournament championship final, and now in the first weekend of the national tournament, where they've just been gangbusters. I think we've seen them all year be really, really strong, but I think they're playing their best basketball right now, and now's a great time to do that. So I'm going to say Mary Washington at home. They're not messing around. They're going to get to Fort Wayne, and I think maybe they can win big over UW Lacrosse.
Not scared. I like it.
All right. Yep. Brady.
I'm going to go with Lacrosse. I actually had Lacrosse winning. I have Lacrosse my final four of my bracket. I think they're like you said, I think they're going to grind it out. I think they're going to keep it close, and I have them winning the game. So I think I'll take the 9.5 as well,
Yeah.
just a little bit of insurance pick. So Yeah, give me lacrosse.
Okay, I like the bold takes there. Our last game, Zach, here is Gustavus Adolphus, 4.5 point underdogs on the road at University of Chicago. How do you pick this one?
Yeah, this one is really interesting because this is another matchup I had to consider filling out my bracket. And I'll be honest, this is one I kind of got to this point and I let it sit. And I was like, I'll go fill in some other parts of the bracket because I really was conflicted about it. So with 4.5 points to work with, I'll go with Gustavus Adolphus. Um, I feel like if it's as much of a toss-up game as it felt as I was filling out my bracket,
Yeah.
then I got to take the 4.5.
Okay. Zach, for me, Chicago has been great all season long. They got the home court advantage here. For me, just 4.5 was just a little bit too tight for what I see this game. I would say maybe more like 6. I'm going to go with Chicago here to cover. Gustavus is good, but I think Chicago at home. I think they roll in this one by at least 2 possessions. Brady, what about you?
Yeah, I'll finish up with going Chicago as well. I think obviously they've had a fantastic season, ranked number one at one point, and um, want to keep this thing going to Elite Eight. Hopefully, gets them to a Final Four. So I'll go with Chicago with the 4.5.
All right. Well, we got a great weekend of games. Brady, we thank you so much for joining us for the picks. I hope it was everything you hoped it would be. But stick around for 1 second. We'll chat after this. But for the purpose of the podcast, we'll say thank you very much for joining us, and we'll go enjoy these games.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's been a great season, and we'll see how it goes this weekend.
All right, let's move into the mailbag. First one here comes from Rob Domovsky at Rob Domovsky on X. 15 of the 16 host schools on opening weekend made it to the Sweet 16. Obviously, the best teams hosted, but wondering how much you guys or the computer think home court factored. Any gut reaction to that one, Matt? I think we can start with, hey, look at any game that was kind of a one possession game between a host and a non-host, and you could say that that's kind of the home court factor right there making a difference. I don't know if it's necessarily fair to call it that cut and dried, but I'm thinking of like Roanoke at Emory. We talked about Bellhaven at St. Thomas.
Yeah.
You could talk about Whitewater at Wash U, right? Those are all kind of games that the host was within a single possession game. If you play that on a neutral court, if you play that on the other team's court, does that lead to a different result? Who knows? Even talk about Trinity Babson being up double digits in the second half. If that game is at Babson, does that lead to a different result? Maybe.
I just kind of looked at if you take any random kind of 50-50-ish game and you switch the home court, that maybe takes a 50-50 neutral site game to like a 58%. So maybe you add 8 to 10%. I think that would maybe mean if every pod was exactly even, then maybe your now home court team would win 36% of the time rather than 25% of the time out of that 4-team pod. So that adds maybe like 0.11 expected wins over the course of 16 pods. Maybe that adds about 1.5 or 2 wins over kind of just completely random. So I think that's maybe where we're at, is about two additional favorites will advance. Now that's the extreme end if everything was 50-50. If you're Randolph-Macon and you're like 90% plus on your games, you're not getting an 8-point swing. So that's maybe the extreme end, is 1 or 2 extra teams advance due to home court advantage than you would see if it was maybe a neutral court type tournament.
Sounds good. One more here from Drew Latrenta. Do you consider conference tournaments part of the regular season? Feels like everyone has a different opinion on this. What's yours?
I mean, so interesting because we're running NPI all the time. Those get included in the tournament selection kind of numbers, and they're frozen after that. So that from that standpoint, that's kind of treated like regular season games. But I think of them as postseason. I think your regular season is done after game 25, right? In Division III, typically teams play 25 games, and then after that, your conference tournament is a postseason. So that's kind of how I consider it.
I think of Division III basketball seasons like this. There's different phases. You got non-conference play, you got conference play, you've got conference tournament, trumpets, NCAA tournament, confetti. Those are the segments I think of with a Division III basketball season.
Okay. So we're not quite to confetti, but we're after trumpets. Well, I guess conference tournaments
No,
are
yeah.
before
If you're
trumpets.
putting in the "you are here," it's NCAA tournament here, right? We're between the trumpets and the confetti.
But even with all those phases, you would say that it's after regular season. Conference tournaments are after regular season.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, conference play and non-conference play is part of the regular season. I typically think about it as regular season still. Like, I understand there is kind of a postseason-ish segment to it, and because you don't know what that game is.
Yeah.
But there are non-conference tournaments,
Yeah.
right, where you don't know. You've got a TBA, a TBD, where they play a game on Saturday dependent on what happens Friday, right? So I don't think necessarily the tournament or unpredictable opponent nature of it has to make that a defining feature that is somehow separate from the regular season. Like,
Although in those games, you know you have a game in the like a preseason tournament type of a thing. You know you have a game. Whereas in the conference tournament, if you lose, then you don't have another game. You're done.
oh, there's no doubt there's a different dynamic to it. But
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if we're talking about regular season, NCAA tournament, like, it's very much still regular season, right? I don't know.
Sure. Anyway, interesting thought discussion.
So Drew asked because there's differing opinions on that, and so he asked us, and I guess we have differing opinions on it.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Perfect place to wrap up this week's show. All right, let's move on and get out of here with a word of thanks to the great people, including Rob and Drew, who support us on Patreon at patreon.com/D3 Datacast. Also, special shout out to some new supporters this week, Mark Kraus and Samuel Rosenblatt. Glad to have them on board. Glad to have the people who have stuck with us to continue supporting what we do at D3 Datacast. Hey, Matt, this slide is getting full again.
Yes. We'd love to either make a new page or fit a few more people in here. So that's great to see. We love all these supporters. We love that Brady was able to join us. We love having student athletes watch our crazy little show. So thank you from that perspective as well. We just really enjoy making these videos. We're enjoying the tournament so much. Let's go watch some more games next weekend, Zach. Good job, team.